Number 10. Symbiote Spider-Man. While technically still 616 Peter Parker, Symbiote Spider-Man could be considered an alternate in the sense that it was a very specific version of Peter, or a very specific time in his life where he took to using more brutal and violent tactics to deal with criminals. This was of course brought upon by the alien symbiote who had bonded to Peter and who he had mistaken for just being a new suit initially. Eventually, Spider-Man in his black suit realized that the suit itself was alive and had kind of taken him over. He fought hard, sought out help, and would eventually become separated from the suit, who otherwise did not wish to leave him. In so doing, Spider-Man would unwillingly create an even worse villain in Venom. At least, initially. Venom might be a hero now, but of course he did not start out that way, instead being a determined and relentless enemy to Spider-Man in his early years in the comics, who also sometimes was prone to cannibalistic tendencies and threats. Number 9. Superior Spider-Man. Superior Spider-Man is an alternate version of Spider-Man who actually hails from the reality of Earth 616 as well. Superior Spider-Man was the name given to Otto Octavius' version of Spider-Man, which came about after a plot to steal Spider-Man's body was successful. Otto's body was failing, and so he decided to live on by swapping bodies with Peter Parker, which meant that Peter's consciousness ended up dying in Otto's failing body, while Otto's consciousness got to live on inside Peter's young and healthy bod. However, Peter managed to convince Otto to be a hero before he passed away, and so Otto set out to do so, aiming to be a better hero even than Peter had been. Of course, Octavius in the end wasn't really cut out for heroics, although he did do his best. He struggled at times with making the right choices and was also prone to doling out more severe forms of punishment for villains and using more sinister methods when it came to keeping the streets safe. In the end, he chose to relinquish the title and body back to Peter, who still managed to live on via his subconscious, which still remained attached to his original body. And friends, if you are loving this list and you want more lists like it, be sure to let us know by smashing that like button. I mean, there's definitely a lot of evil Spider-Men out there, so I'm pretty sure we could keep going with this one. Number 8. The CEO. In an alternate 2099 reality we see explored in the video game Spider-Man Edge of Time, Peter-Man actually ends up being the big villain. In this reality, Peter goes on to become the CEO of Alchemax. His goal was noble, but kinda selfish and also kinda messed up. He hoped to use time gateway technology to channel quantum energy and bring back the lives of all of those that he'd lost. In this reality, Peter Parker was still Spider-Man, but either faked his death or just let everyone believe he had died so he could work behind the scenes as Alchemax's CEO, getting everything in place so that he could eventually put his own plan into motion. This version of Peter ends up getting erased from time after Miguel O'Hara's Spider-Man beats him up and manages to basically reset young Peter's story, thereby convincing Peter to never become the CEO of Alchemax and preventing this evil future self from ever existing. Number 7. Asset 42. Asset 42 was likely one of the first clones ever made by the Assessor of Miles Morales. This clone was considered to be a burner clone and only lasted a few issues, but what a roller coaster of a ride those few issues he appeared in were. This evil version of Miles Morales first appeared in issue 17 of the Miles Morales Spider-Man series, and shortly thereafter perished in a fight against Miles. Miles seemingly kills Asset 42 in this fight, but in reality the clone was revealed to have only really been made to last for about a day. So it's highly likely that even without fighting Miles, he would have just died, as he was already breaking down and basically turning into liquid-like goo, as is evident in his final fight against the original one and only Miles Morales. Asset 42 was in league with Ultimatum and helped to kidnap the real Miles for that villain. Number 6. Ultimatum. Ultimatum is an evil alternate version of hero and Spider-Man Miles Morales. Or really, he's the main counterpart to Miles, who hails from Earth 1610, the Ultimate Universe. Ultimatum is the version of Miles that existed on Earth 616, his 616 counterpart. 616 Miles was a criminal who allied himself with the Kingpin. Growing up and belonging to a crime family, he proved his loyalty to Wilson Fisk and was permitted by the Kingpin to later on retire, because he was so loyal. However, after his wife died, he decided to do what Kingpin himself had ultimately decided against when it came to his dead wife Vanessa, to find an alternate version of her in the multiverse who was alive so that he could reunite with her. Miles ended up in the reality of Earth 1610 as a result. Eventually, he would return to Earth 616, only to find that Miles of 1610 had emigrated there. Ultimatum at this point decided to set things right and planned to send Miles and his family back to 1610, taking back his rightful place as the Miles Morales of 616, and aiming to become become a prominent criminal and villain in New York thereafter.
Coming in at number 5, we have the Merciless, another of the Dark Knights. In an alternate universe in which Ares, the god of war, declared war against all of existence, Batman stood with the rest of the Justice League in a battle that literally lasted for eons, until the sole combatants left in the entire universe were Ares and Batman, still standing through sheer willpower alone. After landing a blow that knocked Ares' magical helmet off, Batman was forced to put the helmet on to finally defeat the God of War, leaving him the only survivor of this burned-out universe. This Batman unfortunately became addicted to the power and bloodlust granted to him by the helmet, and joined forces with the rest of the Dark Knights in order to survive the destruction of his universe, going forth to find new worlds for him to become a new God of War against. Coming in at number 4, we've got another of the Dark Knights with Murder Machine. This version of Bruce Wayne comes from a universe very similar to the main DC continuity until the tragic death of Alfred Pennyworth at the hands of multiple Batman villains. Heartbroken and traumatized by the footage of the incident, Batman convinces his friend Cyborg to recreate Alfred's personality as an artificial intelligence. Unfortunately, this AI takes its task of protecting Batman far too literally, altering his brain chemistry to erase any sense of fear and completely replacing Bruce's frail human body with a metal replacement. Taking the name of Murder Machine, this Batman spread the Alfred AI throughout Gotham and was able to kill every criminal in Arkham Asylum, showing what would truly happen if Batman didn't have a heart. Coming in at number 3, we have the Devastator, a horrifying combination of Batman and Doomsday. This story takes place on one of the many dark multiverse worlds that saw Superman going rogue and taking over the entire planet, even murdering his own wife. To stop the demented Man of Steel, this Batman was forced to ingest the Doomsday virus, a last-ditch effort to save the planet that gave Bruce the strength to kill Superman, but at the terrible cost of his own mind. Furthermore, the Doomsday virus began to spread off Bruce's body and kill off the rest of this world, dooming the planet anyways, and leaving the Devastator as a beast-like Batman waiting for the rest of the Dark Knights to save him from his collapsing planet and give him a new target to hunt, even if eventually this Doomsday Batman hybrid would be defeated by, you guessed it, the real Superman. Coming in at number 2, we have the Emperor of Shadow, aka Bruce Wayne. In a recent one-off issue entitled Batman Superman Authority Special, Batman discovers a reality from the dark multiverse where Ra's al Ghul's plans to dominate humanity have come to pass, and the League of Shadows has become an Empire of Shadows, controlling the entire world. To make matters worse, the leader of this empire is a Bruce Wayne who gave in to Ra's al Ghul's teachings and embraced his position as the world's new emperor. While Batman and Superman were eventually able to destroy the link between this world and the regular DC universe in order to prevent an invasion, this twisted version of Bruce Wayne is still out there, likely biding his time until the next opportunity arises for the Dark Multiverse to attack the regular multiverse once again. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have the Batman Who Laughs. In a dark alternate world where the Joker realizes he's dying and begins a mass killing spree of everyone in Gotham, Batman is forced to finally kill his fated foe. Unfortunately, at the moment of death, Bruce was infected with a special brand of Joker venom that completely flipped his moral compass, but left intact all of his intelligence and planning. All of the chaos of the Joker with the brains of Batman, this supervillain is Bruce Wayne's worst nightmare come to life, and so far remains the most evil and deadly variant to ever be seen across the entire dark multiverse.
Number 10, Kane Parker. Kane was one of the first evil clones ever made of Spider-Man, and really, he wasn't evil of his own choosing. He was kind of just a bad dude because he was so defective and was quickly degenerating. His degeneration made Kane somewhat insane, and his powers also didn't help. His own version of Spider-Sense was more precognitive, giving him visions of the future. The problem? With each vision he viewed, he would become more and more unhinged. Kane Parker would start out as being more of a sinister figure, but as time went on, he'd really become more of a moody anti-hero in the comics. In some cases, he was also only originally an antagonist because his motives were misunderstood by Peter. Number 9. the Jackal. At one point, another clone who was previously considered to be one of the best clones with the most potential for good also turned to the dark side. Yes, this clone was none other than Ben Reilly. Having recalled all of his deaths from when Miles was experimenting on Ben in an attempt to perfect the cloning process, Ben became somewhat unhinged. He ended up defeating and killing Miles Warren only to bring him back as a clone and convince Miles to work for him. This would result in Ben adopting the mantle of the Jackal for himself and building a clone army of Spider-Man's previously dead friends, allies, and even villains, as well as building the New U Technologies Corporation. In exchange for the clones' cooperation, Ben provided them with pills that would help to stave off the degeneration while he worked to perfect the cloning process himself, and a frequency technology that would substitute the pill for, well, likely only a chosen few, because Ben probably wanted to control the other clones. He was like, I'm good, but also I'm kind of controlling you. While he meant well, when Peter was approached to join the Jackal, who was revealed to him to be Ben, he simply refused, believing that the Jackal was a perfect example of having all the power, but none of the responsibility. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want another list like it where we talk about even more evil Spider-Men, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. There are surprisingly a lot of evil Spider-Men out there. Number 8. Ghost Spider. While redeemed in the end, initially when we met Peter Parker, who was to become Ghost Spider, we would learn of just how evil he was. Ghost Spider is the Peter Parker from Reality Earth 11618, where he was previously known as simply the Amazing Spider. Not to be confused with Ghost Spider, who is Gwen Stacy from an alternate reality. I think that's Earth 65. So now there's kind of two Ghost Spiders, but anyways. This version of Ghost Spider makes an appearance in the 2011 ASM Annual number 38. Here we learn what happens when Uncle Ben does not die, but instead gets to live out his life alongside his nephew. He ends up teaching Peter that with great power comes a great responsibility to keep said power. As a result, he ends up training Peter, who eventually not only becomes a successful hero, but also a successful businessman and a successful scientist. Uncle Ben and Peter decide to use their scientific knowledge to lure other Spider-Men from the multiverse to their reality, and then drain them of their power to be used to booster or bolster the Amazing Spider's own abilities and powers, making him even more powerful with each transfer. However, the Spider-Man of Earth 616, when caught in this trap, was able to convince the Amazing Spider that what he was doing was pretty wrong. In the end, he sacrificed his own powers and life to help the Spider-Man of 616 escape. However, he didn't actually die, but ended up in a coma, with his soul trapped in hell. Eventually, he would awaken and return as Ghost Spider. Redemption, baby. Number 7. Poison. Poison is the alternate version of Peter Parker who comes from the What If version of the other story. In this version of the story, Peter abandons the spider within himself. This leaves Peter detached and vulnerable. Sensing this, the Venom symbiote leaves its then host, Matt Gargan, in pursuit of Peter Parker, who is still within his cocoon. The symbiote forcibly bonds with Peter and emerges from the cocoon as a new entity that goes by the name of Poison. Instinctively returning to Mary Jane, it then attempts to convince her to join its side, but terrified of what both the symbiote and what Peter have become, she rejects them. Ultimately, they decide to dig up the body of Gwen Stacy and make her their new partner in crime. Yikes. Poison is all around just bad news. Very, very evil. Very spooky. Not that all spooky things need to be evil, just to be clear. Number 6. Zombie Peter. This alternate version of Peter Parker hails from Earth 2149, sometimes referred to as Earth Z or the Marvel Zombieverse. In this reality, Peter did his best to hold out and avoid becoming infected, but ultimately did succumb to that after being bitten by Steve Rogers, known as Colonel America in this reality. After being bitten, Spider-Man began to transform into a zombie. Before the change overtook him, he hoped to get Aunt May and Mary Jane somewhere safe and return home, only to be overcome by the infection. As a result, he ended up eating both of his loved ones, unable to resist the hunger he felt deep inside himself. Spider-Man in this reality goes on to become one of the zombie Galacti, taking on the power Cosmic after eating Galactus. However, in the end, he's also one of the few surviving zombies who aims to prevent the spread of the zombie plague to other universes, eventually becoming a hero once more. As so many evil Spider-Men do, they always come around in the end, even if they're a zombie. Number 5. William Burnside. William Burnside was the Captain America of the 1950s, who ended up being retconned to not actually be Steve Rogers at all, although he was a man who believed he was Steve Rogers. This version of Captain America was later revealed to be William Burnside initially, a man who was hired to replace Captain America after he went missing in World War II. This version of Captain America was racist and extremely anti-communist, echoing the McCarthy communist witch hunts of those times. Burnside illegally changed his name to Steven Rogers and would have an extended lifespan thanks to a version of the super soldier serum that he was exposed to. However, because this was not a perfected version of the serum, it apparently would also cause him to become more extreme over time as his psyche and mind degraded as a result, so made him pretty crazy and pretty evil. Number 4. Evil Clone. An evil clone with the mind of Red Skull. To be honest, this has happened multiple times in the comics, where Red Skull has ended up having his consciousness, his personality, or his memories, or some combination of those, into the clone of Steve Rogers. It's happened both in the main continuity and in alternate universes. For this version though, we're going to be talking about issue 350 of Captain America, where the Red Skull in Steven Rogers' clone body ends up being the mastermind behind the whole commission/Walker kerfuffle that we talked about earlier on this list. His plan this time around in a Steve Rogers' clone body is to discard his previous ideologies and use capitalism itself to dismantle the democracy of America and destroy the nation from the inside out. It doesn't work out in the end, and the issue ends with him facing off against both John Walker and the Captain and becoming deformed once more by the red dust of death. But he did try it. He did try. And don't worry, he would come back in more clone bodies. That's how he do. Number 3. Vampire King. This version of Captain America comes from the Exile series, where he becomes king of the vampires. In the alternate reality of Earth 3931 during World War II by Baron Blood. Baron Blood turns him into a vampire. Vampire Cap is definitely not a good dude. Likely the most evil of all the monstrous Captain Americas listed here, this version of Captain America has his own sinister version of the Avengers and Thralls, who he enlists and forces to fight for him. However, he still proves to be no match for the Exiles, who end up defeating and decapitating him in the end. Number 2. President Red Skull. Not an alternate version of Steve Rogers, but an alternate version of Red Skull who beat Rogers and took to wearing his Captain America suit off and around his new redecorated Oval Office. This alternate version of Red Skull comes from the Old Man Logan universe, where Red Skull ends up appointing himself the new president of the US, which he renames America. America with a K. Red Skull ends up not just defeating Captain America, but also almost all of the superhero community when he manages to rally together an impossible to defeat force of supervillains who coordinate their attack on the nation. Being that he's Red Skull, he's probably one of the most evil versions of Captain America out there because he's Red Skull, although like I said, he's not fully a Cap alt really, but he definitely evil, so. And he does wear that suit a lot. Number 1. Hydra Supreme. This alternate version of Captain America was initially retconned to be the version of Captain America. Steven Rogers ended up being revealed as a Hydra sleeper agent in one of the biggest twists in comic book history. All his heroic actions had apparently just been Steve buying time and building trust so that he'd be in the perfect position to take over the US and could then reveal his true colors. Hail Hydra to this day is one of the most iconic lines ever uttered by the supposed hero. However, it all turned out that this version of Cap wasn't the real Steve Rogers of 616. Instead, what happened was Kobik, the sentient living version of the Cosmic Cube, was convinced by Red Skull that reality should be warped so that Cap could become an agent of Hydra. When this happened, the real heroic version of Captain America ended up trapped within a shard of the Cosmic Cube, and the now altered version of the character took his place in the reality of 616. In the end, the true Cap would be freed from the shard and would end up fighting and defeating his evil Hydra Supreme alternate version. And if you're worried, don't worry, the shard was made bigger, so it wasn't like little tiny Cap running around.
Starting us off in at number 10, Black Flash. The actual physical representation of death for all speedsters, Black Flash is the Grim Reaper of the Speed Force. Making his first appearance in The Flash Volume 2 number 138 back in 1998, he was seen before the deaths of several speedsters including Barry Allen, Johnny Quick, and Bart Allen. But he also tried to return Wally West to the Speed Force, but was unsuccessful, taking Linda Park instead, Wally's girlfriend. Black Flash eventually did return to try to claim Wally again, freezing time for everyone without a connection to the Speed Force to do so, but thanks to the combined efforts of multiple speedsters, Wally was able to race Black Flash until the end of time, causing death to have no meaning. The CW Black Flash, which was really just Hunter Zolomon aka Zoom, was killed during season 3 when Savitar lured him out of the Speed Force and then Killer Frost froze him, resulting in her first kill that actually turned out to be her ex as well. Dare I say, ice cold. But that didn't stop the Speed Force anyway, since later on Barry Allen returned in the Flash Rebirth storyline in the comics, becoming the new Black Flash. So this is also a version of the original Flash as well as a separate entity. In at 9, Inertia. The bitter feud between the Allen family and the Thawne family would span generations. Even in the 30th century, President Thawne sought to recruit Bart Allen in his revenge campaign against the Allens, since Bart was half Thawne himself. When that failed, Thawne mixed Bart's DNA with Thawne's genetic material to create a speedster clone who he named Thaddeus Thawne. Whereas Bart grew in a hyper-accelerated world, Thaddeus' childhood was the exact opposite, because of course it was, he's the reverse. His development was super slow, which led the young speedster to become more calculated and methodical. Thaddeus was also taught to hate the Allen family, and Impulse in particular. In addition to this modification, Thaddeus' growth and development was slowed. This is in contrast to Bart's accelerated development. However, after killing Bart, Wally West had other plans. Upon hearing of Bart's death, an enraged Flash hunted Inertia down. Though he thought of killing him, Flash decided instead to do something worse. He used his abilities to slow Inertia's movements down to the point where he was totally immobile, essentially a living statue, and then he placed Inertia on display at the Flash Museum facing statues of Bart Allen as Impulse and Kid Flash. He could still think, see, and hear in normal time, but was frozen in place. Inertia was then just doomed to spend an eternity in a state of near total paralysis, staring at images of the guy he killed. In at 8, Godspeed. August Hart is the former detective partner of Barry Allen. August was the only witness to Barry's accident that turned him into the Flash, and while going after a criminal organization called the Black Hole, August was struck by lightning during a Speed Force storm in Central City. August became the ruthless vigilante known as Godspeed, and got his revenge on the man who he suspected to have killed his brother. He had given up on the justice system since his brother's killer had gone free, and with his newfound power, had the ability to become judge, jury, and executioner. August realized after he had gotten his powers that he also had the ability to steal others' speed, though for a time he could only do it by killing them. He practiced this skill to be able to do it non-lethally as well though. With his new godlike speed, August was able to move so fast as to create duplicates of himself at any given time, allowing him to give the illusion that he and Godspeed were different people, which is pretty damn sick, considering the alternatives are Speed Mirage and Time Remnant, which aren't exactly the same thing but are still fairly similar. And at 7, Earth X. There's little known about the Earth X version of Barry Allen. Known as Blitzkrieg in this reality, he's a fascist version of the Flash working alongside Dark Arrow and Overgirl, the Oliver Queen and Kara Zor-El of Earth X, who are also married, but that's a story for another day. In the Arrow vs. Crisis on Earth X crossover, Earth X Barry is actually nowhere to be seen. Instead, he's replaced by Reverse Flash, the Eobard Thawne of Earth 1. Even though on the animated show The Ray, which takes place on Earth X, there is a fascist Barry, so what happened? It's largely assumed that between his last appearance in the show and in the crossover, that Thawne arrived and took his chance to kill at least a version of Barry, even if it wasn't his own. Hence why the other Earth Xers were so trusting of Thawne, since he had bested their Barry. I don't know how this Barry got his powers without the particle accelerator, but what I do know is that even the Joker refused to work with the Red Skull when he realized that he was actually a fascist and not some kook in a wildly inappropriate costume, saying that he may be a psychopath, but he's an American psychopath, or something along those lines. So, Reverse Flash is worse than Joker confirmed. Like, this wasn't even a Reverse Flash who was raised in the fascist life. He just wanted to help out, which is messed up as hell. And at 6, Zoom. Hunter Zolomon was a serial killer from Earth 2, also known as the maniacal super speedster known as Zoom. Having gotten tired of being the villain, Hunter decided to also become the hero after capturing Jay Garrick, the Flash from Earth 3, masquerading as Jay to gain Barry Allen's trust. When he was 11, Hunter saw his father kill his mother. Hunter's father ended up in jail, and Hunter was raised in the foster care system since no relative wanted him. Hunter later became a convicted serial killer and was going through electroshock therapy when Earth 2 Harrison Wells' particle accelerator exploded underground. This ended up connecting him to the Speed Force and he escaped. Zolomon killed some police officers on his way out and left one to tell his story. The one police officer said he saw a man zooming around, giving Zolomon the alias of Zoom. Zoom later then killed that police officer in his house.
Coming in at number 5, we have the Iron Maniac. On the dark alternate world of Earth 5012, most of the superheroes of this reality are dead after an unknown fatal error made by Reed Richards. A vengeful and violent Tony Stark makes it his life's mission to get revenge on Reed and modifies his armor to resemble that of Reed's worst enemy, Doctor Doom. This insane version of Iron Man killed the Human Torch and was eventually banished to the main Marvel universe, where he had to be subdued by the combined efforts of Spider-Man, Captain America, and Black Widow, who found it a bit unnerving to be fighting such a far-gone version of one of their closest allies. This Tony was just as resourceful as the real one, however, as he'd even escape custody by building a new suit from the remains of a life model decoy. Pretty resourceful for an insane Iron Man. Coming in at number 4, we have the superior Iron Man. During an event known as Axis, many Marvel heroes and villains had their morality completely inverted, with good guys becoming bad, bad guys becoming good, and so on and so forth. One of the few changes that wasn't reversed by the end of the event, however, was the morality of Iron Man, who in his evil form still possessed all of the intelligence and dark aspects of Tony's personality, and managed to build a shield for himself to prevent being turned into a hero again. Infecting much of the planet with a new version of the Extremis virus, and using artificially intelligent drones to assert his dominance, this version of Tony was only finally cured by the Marvel Universe's collapse into Battleworld resetting his morals, meaning that this was a villain that the rest of the Avengers didn't even manage to properly defeat. Coming in at number 3, we have Obadiah Stane, aka the Ironmonger in the very first Iron Man film. It's become a bit of a meme at this point that many of the supervillains of the MCU are dark reflections of the same powers and personalities as the heroes they're opposing, and the Ironmonger is the origin of that trope in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Completely guilt-free about selling weapons to all sides, Stane is a ruthless businessman willing to do anything to maintain control of Stark Industries, and shows just how awful Tony's new technology could be used in the wrong hands, and what a monster he could become if he gave up on his deepest morals. Although, honestly, the fact that his idea of upgrading the Iron Man suit is just to make the original one bigger, maybe he's not quite as smart as Tony after all. Coming in at number 2, we have the evil Emperor Stark. Hailing from the destroyed world of Earth 42777, this version of Iron Man was perhaps the cruelest the multiverse had ever seen, as he manipulated Magneto and the Brotherhood of Mutants into declaring war on humanity, then used the resulting anti-mutant backlash to secure power as the world's only superhero. Holding entire countries hostage with natural disasters and even spreading plagues among his own citizens, this version of Tony declared himself Emperor Stark, taking the cloak of Doctor Doom as a final trophy. This was Iron Man at his most evil, and he was an incredibly powerful threat when encountered by the multiverse-traveling Exiles, only eventually defeated by his own universe's last superhero survivor, Sue Storm. A tragic end for a tragic villain. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have Zombie Iron Man. When Earth 2149 was first hit by the zombie plague that's since been highlighted in multiple Marvel spin-off series, this version of Iron Man attempted to use teleportation technology to escape to a different universe with Nick Fury. However, a zombified Fantastic Four arrived too quickly for this plan, and Tony was bitten, becoming a living corpse inside his metal armor and developing a bloodlust and pure hunger for human flesh. Still surviving even after having his legs blasted off by the Silver Surfer, the zombified Iron Man would go on to lead the rest of the undead heroes and villains in an attack against Galactus and gain this universe's power cosmic, meaning he could now pursue more flesh throughout the entire universe and bring the zombie plague to the rest of the doomed cosmos. Coming in at number 10, we've got Bat-Zaro from Bizarro World. Hailing from the planet founded by Superman's own twisted doppelganger, Bat-Zaro is the self-proclaimed world's worst detective, and spends his nights shooting down couples in Crime Alley as an awful inversion of Bruce Wayne's motivation for being Batman. More of a weird comedic foil to Batman than an actual supervillain threat, Bat-Zaro would eventually try to redeem himself by fighting the Joker and jumping in front of a bullet meant for the real Batman, meaning maybe Bat-Zaro had a little bit of good in him after all. Coming in at number 9, we have the Red Death. The first of many Dark Knights on this list, twisted variants of Bruce Wayne that banded together to escape their dying dark multiverse, the Red Death is a chilling example of what Batman could become if he cared more for his mission than he did for his friends. After the deaths of many of his allies in Gotham City, this version of Batman determined that he was more worthy of using the Speed Force than Barry Allen, and could have saved Robin's life if he was only a bit faster. Unfortunately, this version of Bruce took this plan way too far, capturing the Flash and combining his powers into himself, becoming the Red Death and forcing Barry Allen's consciousness to watch as he began killing every supervillain on the planet and continued his rampage across the entire multiverse. Coming in at number 8, we have the Dawnbreaker. In a dark multiverse world where Bruce Wayne was the one gifted a Green Lantern ring instead of Hal Jordan, this version of Bruce quickly became frustrated with all of the restrictions the Lantern Corps placed on his ring and his ability to wield emotions. Killing every criminal he encountered, Batman's power grew as he combined his ring with the darkness in his own heart, becoming known as the Dawnbreaker as he systematically wiped out every other Green Lantern in the galaxy. By the time he was done, he was the only lantern-wielding entity left in his universe, and joined the Dark Knights in order to find more victims to punish. Coming in at number 7, we have Owlman, the evil opposite of Bruce Wayne from the inverted Earth 3. Born under the name of Thomas Wayne Jr., as a young boy, Owlman murdered his younger brother Bruce and had his butler Alfred kill his parents to ensure that the Wayne fortune was not wasted by their frivolous spending. Using his costumed identity as Owlman to intimidate the leaders of Gotham into falling under his control, Owlman was a twisted version of everything that Batman stood for, and every time their universes have crossed over has led to some incredibly dramatic battles. And speaking of evil Batmen named Thomas Wayne, coming in at number 6, we have the Batman of the Flashpoint universe, aka Thomas Wayne Sr. In a world where Bruce was gunned down by Joe Chill instead of his parents, Thomas Wayne became a dark and murderous red-tinted Batman, while Martha would be cursed to become this universe's version of the Joker. While initially an anti-hero ally during the first reveal of the Flashpoint universe, this Batman would go on to become a threat to the real Batman when he returned to the main DC universe and allied himself with Bane in order to get Bruce to quit being Batman forever. There's probably an easier way to get your son to stop being a superhero than allying yourself with a supervillain, but hey, I guess that's just some Wayne family drama that will continue to unfold as Thomas Wayne continues to make his way through the DC multiverse. Coming in at number 5, we have the group known as Sinister's Six, and surprisingly, this isn't just a bunch of Spider-Man villains. A group of 6 red-eyed clones of the X-Men working for Mr. Sinister, this villainous group did have a few run-ins with the Wallcrawler, but only during the series known as Spider-Man and the X-Men, so it all works out. These evil clones were initially an intense obstacle preventing the real X-Men from getting closer to Mr. Sinister's schemes, but would ironically eventually be defeated by the same condition that seems to always follow Spider-Man related clone stories, cellular degeneration. Better luck next time, Sinister Six. Coming in at number 4, we have the twisted Bobby Drake, aka Iceman of the Age of Apocalypse universe. In a world where Apocalypse has taken over mutant kind and only Magneto and a few X-Men are capable of fighting back, the usually optimistic Bobby Drake was forged into a heartless warrior, giving him much stronger control of his ice powers than other depictions of the character, and becoming a living streak of ice that can travel instantly through water to lethal effect. This version of Iceman would eventually betray his teammates and ally himself with Dark Beast, and was only eventually able to be defeated by having his head shoved inside a furnace, a surefire way to finally melt this evil Iceman. Coming in at number 3, we have the vampire variant of Storm, known fittingly enough as Bloodstorm. In an alternate reality where Storm was bitten by Dracula before discovering the X-Men, Storm came to Charles Xavier for help with her condition. Unfortunately, her bloodlust was too strong and she wound up feasting on both the Professor and Beast. Horrified at what she'd done, this version of Storm would eventually try and redeem herself after she found herself as part of an invasion force attacking the main Marvel universe. universe. While she eventually bonded and made amends with the Beast of this dimension, her combination of weather controlling and vampire powers made Bloodstorm one of the more powerful X-Men variants that the regular X-Men ever had to face. Coming in at number 2, we have the one and only Magneto from the Ultimate Universe. Magneto might often be an enemy of the X-Men, but in recent years has allied himself with them more often than not. This version of Magneto, however, is much more cynical and dark than the more complex figure of the regular Marvel Universe. And when he believed his children had been killed by Doctor Doom, Ultimate Magneto was furious enough to begin a global genocide. Switching the polarity of Earth's poles with his magnetic powers and beginning the incredibly controversial event known as Ultimatum, this version of Magneto caused the deaths of millions of people and dozens of beloved superheroes, and was only finally stopped when Cyclops put him out of his misery with a laser blast directly to the head. And finally, coming to our top spot, we have another version of Professor Charles Xavier, or more specifically, the part of his mind known as Onslaught. For years, Professor X has done all he can to achieve peace and prosperity for mutant kind, while not allowing his anger at humanity to get the better of him. But after all this time of psychically repressing every dark and evil thought he ever had, Xavier had made the perfect ticking time bomb. And when he briefly had a mental battle with his best frenemy, Magneto, a portion of Magneto's less held back personality combined with all of the darkness in Xavier's heart and created one of the most dangerous psychic creations of all time, the villain known as Onslaught. A personality made up of the worst possible versions of both Professor X and Magneto, Onslaught is the pinnacle of what can happen when the X-Men go bad.
Number 10, Jonathan Walker. US agent might be a hero now in the comics, but when he started out in the 616 continuity, he was manipulated into becoming a villain. Jonathan Walker was initially known as antagonistic hero Super Patriot, who did his best to discredit Captain America, claiming that he himself stood for the United States' true ideals. As a result of Red Skull's meddling and manipulation, he was appointed to replace Steve Rogers as the new Captain America after Rogers stepped down as the government actually owned the title and refused to let him keep the title if he wasn't going to be working for them. As Captain America, Walker took a very extreme and violent approach that put him into direct conflict with Rogers, who was currently going by the mantle of the Captain. In the end, the Captain defeated Walker, and after Skull's involvement in the ordeal was revealed, the two ended up teaming up to take him down, starting off on Walker's path to redemption as hero US agent. Number 9, Cap Wolf. Werewolf Captain America isn't as much an alternate version of Cap as it is a distinct moment in Cap's history where he happened to be transformed into a werewolf. Captain America ends up becoming a werewolf while on the trail of Colonel John Jameson, who had gone missing. Captain America himself had reason to suspect that something awful had happened to Jameson, who it seemed may be plagued by his wolf side once more. Jameson was known in the past for operating as Man-Wolf. It seemed as though a wolf-like creature or werewolf was responsible for a series of murders. In the end, however, Cap's trail ended up leading him into a much more complex and disturbing plot where a villain was attempting to use a recreated Werewolf by Night wolf serum to turn people into werewolves. Captain America became one of their victims and for a time became a werewolf himself. Granted, he was still a hero at this point, but werewolves in general are considered to be somewhat uncontrollable monsters who are at least occasionally ruled by their own bloodlust. So I think we can at least partially count Cap Wolf. Also, I needed to complete the monster trifecta. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more Captain America lists, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8, MCU US Agents. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, US Agent John Walker accidentally becomes an evil version of Captain America without really intending to do that. Really, it's more complicated than him just being straight up evil, as it is with most Marvel Cinematic Universe antagonists. Walker really wants to do right by the Captain America mantle and do it justice. He's a soldier who has worked super hard to earn this title, but also, although his heart might be in the right place, that doesn't mean that he knows the best way to approach replacing Cap or doing right by his legacy. Walker ends up becoming misguided as a result of dealing with so much disrespect from those around him, and as a result of him not being as powerful as Cap would be, because he doesn't have the super soldier serum. He realizes that being chosen and respected as the new Captain America by the government doesn't necessarily mean that the people of the United States will also respect you, nor that Steve's actual allies and friends will respect you as his replacement either. After he loses his own best friend, Lamar Hoskins, he becomes completely fed up with trying to figure out how to do what's right, and instead decides to do what he feels needs to be done. This makes him much more violent and much more dangerous, turning him into an enemy of Falcon and Winter Soldier, and leading the government to later on remove his title, his honors, and basically just overall dismiss him. Fortunately, the US agent still found a place on what will likely be either the MCU Thunderbolts or Dark Avengers team. TBD, or at least to be declared, if not to be determined. Number 7. Mutant Captain America. This version of Captain America was a mutant who ended up replacing the original Captain America after he died in a Sentinel attack. He wasn't just given the mantle of Cap either, but also ended up receiving the super soldier serum. He had this and his own mutant powers besides, which made him pretty crazy powerful. Although the mutant version of Cap had good intentions, his powers were somewhat uncontrollable, which was a big problem. His powers going haywire was what ended up causing the death of his own group, the Six, and the Avengers, who he was at the time fighting against. This caused him to lose his sanity, turning him into a full-on villain and a loose cannon who attacked and defeated pretty much everyone who came after him, except Havoc, who managed to successfully kill and defeat the crazed mutant version of Captain America. Poor mutant Captain America, it sounds like it was a rough go, you know? Number 6. Zombie Colonel America. What's worse than a werewolf Cap? A zombie Cap, obviously. This is the version of Captain America that we get in the Marvel Zombieverse. Although really, this isn't Captain America as a zombie, it's Colonel America, because that is Steve Rogers' hero mantle in this reality. Here, Colonel America was infected and turned into a zombie during that first confrontation with a zombified Sentry, which the Avengers responded to in downtown New York. Zombie Cap was responsible for turning Spider-Man into a zombie, biting him after he himself was infected. He was one of the zombies to fight against the villains for who should get the remains of Galactus' corpse, and of course with it the power Cosmic, which would enable them to travel to other worlds, which they then could devour. However, Zombie Cap was defeated by his nemesis, a zombified Red Skull. So, no power Cosmic for him. He dead. He's double dead. Really. Number 5. Spider Carnage. Spider Carnage hails from the 90s animated Spider-Man series. Here, Spider Carnage hailed from an alternate reality where after being cloned and losing both his Aunt May and his Uncle Ben, he began to question whether or not he was the real Peter Parker or the clone himself. As this version of Peter was filled with rage, Carnage entered his world via a portal and bonded with this alternate version of Peter Parker, who then became Spider Carnage. Spider Carnage threatened the existence of the entire multiverse, and it took a team of heroic Spider-Men coming together to stop him. Eventually, he was convinced by a still living alternate version of Uncle Ben that what he was doing was wrong, but was unable to remove the Carnage symbiote from him at that point, so he ultimately sacrificed himself to save the world from the evil of Carnage, and kind of the evil of himself, because he was so filled with rage and hate. Number 4. Patient Zero. This version of Peter hails from the reality belonging to the series Marvel Universe vs. the Punisher, the reality of 11080, where Frank Castle, aka the Punisher, was the last known survivor who was forced to take on, you guessed it, the entire Marvel Universe, after the world was ravaged by a deadly and horrifying plague. Here, Peter ends up becoming Patient Zero after a virus, which is the plague, is accidentally released that turns people into violent cannibals. Peter himself devours Rhino during a hockey match and is taken to be researched by the Fantastic Four. However, he does not stay quarantined as the virus spreads to Ben Grimm of the FF, who then releases him. He goes on to become the leader of one of the cannibalistic tribes involved in a turf war. The Punisher ends up killing him after helping to rescue a pregnant Mary Jane in exchange for information that Patient Zero has. I don't think this version of Spider-Man is ever really fully redeemed. He does try to save Mary Jane though, so that's something. Number 3. Patton Parnell. Patton Parnell has to be one of the most evil incarnations of Spider-Man around. He's evil to the core. He literally becomes a Spider-Man, turning into a spider-like human hybrid after he is bit by a radioactive spider. Patton was also kind of always a creep creepy kid, likely as a result of mistreatment that he suffered at the mercy of his Uncle Ted. He had a crush on his next door neighbor, Sarah Jane, and enjoyed disturbing scientific pursuits such as burning ants with a magnifying glass. What fun. When he transformed into Spider-Man, he became more confident in himself, but also acquired a taste for live animal and human flesh. He also was capable of laying eggs, as Uncle Ted would horrifyingly and personally find out after young Patton took revenge on him. That's all I'll say about that, but we might be showing you a scary panel of that right now. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the editor's doing in this video, but cue scary panel of Ted having spiders coming out of him. Ugh. Number 2, the Spider. This is a version of Peter Parker who also merged with the Carnage symbiote, and was possibly driven criminally insane by it. Or was criminally insane to begin with in this reality, perhaps. This version of Peter hails from the reality of Earth 15. Not much is known about his home reality, mainly what we know of it involved Peter's own history. This alternate version of the character bonded with the alien symbiote that is often referred to as Carnage on Earth 616. He became an infamous mass murderer who apparently enjoys hurting people. He made his first appearance in The Exiles in issue number 12, where he showed up with a team of other heroes who were drafted into a multiversal version of Weapon X. I mean, they are heroes there, but they also kinda shady, you know? I mean, not all of them are, but definitely Spider is. Number 1, Wolf Spider. Wolf Spider comes from the animated show Ultimate Spider-Man. He was an alternate version of Peter Parker who hailed from the reality of Earth 16827 and was bad to the bone. Unlike many other alternate versions of Spider-Man, for some reason Wolf Spider became a villain instead of a hero when his spider-like powers manifested. He was a merciless killer, fighting to oppose anyone who fought on the side of good, was a hero, or believed in the ideal of responsibility. He even ended up killing his own reality's version of Miles Morales. And if that doesn't make you evil, I don't know what is, because Miles Morales is the best, and he's such a sweetheart. How dare you do that, Wolf Spider? I can't abide.
Coming in at number 10, we have the Iron Goblin. Coming from an alternate universe where the Spider Island event wound up being permanent, Tony Stark was initially transformed into a human-spider hybrid under the control of the villainous Spider Queen. During a battle with the Resistance, however, Tony was sprayed with the same goblin formula that had corrupted the mind of Norman Osborn, transforming Tony Stark into the Iron Goblin, with a mechanical new costume to match. And while this version of Tony would eventually decide to sacrifice himself in a last moment of humanity before his goblin insanity fully took over, the combination of Iron Man and Green Goblin tech is still a pretty terrifying combo that Spider-Man should hope never reappears. Coming in at number 9, we have the corrupted Iron Man from the controversial 90s event, The Crossing. When a variant of the time-traveling villain Kang the Conqueror, known as Immortus, began using the neural link in the Iron Man suit to secretly begin altering Tony Stark's brainwaves, Iron Man became a sleeper agent within the Avengers and eventually attacked his companions outright after secretly manipulating them for years. While eventually defeated by a time-traveling 19-year-old version of himself, and then retconned into Tony going back to his usual status quo in the Marvel Universe, this controversial storyline shows what would happen if Iron Man truly turned out to be a traitor. Coming in at number 8, we have Iron Thor. During the event that saw God Emperor Doom in control of a Marvel universe converted into a new Battleworld, Doom maintained his complete control over the many realms of Battleworld with a police force army known as the Thor Corps. One of the most powerful of Doom's personal army was the being known as Iron Thor, wearing a combination of the Iron Man armor and Thor's iconic helmet, and investigating any potential rebellions to his master Doom's rule. Even capable of wielding Mjolnir, this super powerful character still managed to be murdered by the hero Warrior Woman as an example of rebellion against Emperor Doom. He might have had a short life, but man, I really love that Iron Thor design. Coming in at number 7, we have the Steel Corpse. Hailing from Earth 11326, this version of Iron Man was pretty similar to our own, but with two key differences. He's permanently fused with his suit, and he absolutely hates mutants. Fighting alongside other villainous Avengers to wipe out this universe's X-Men, this Iron Man's natural body died long ago after being melded with his machinery, and thus he jokingly calls himself the Steel Corpse as a way of coping with his morbid situation. This version of Iron Man had complete mastery of his weaponry, as they were literally a part of his body, and only a last-second change of heart before sacrificing himself stops this Tony Stark from being one of the absolute worst. Coming in at number 6, we have the infamous Iron Patriot, aka Norman Osborn. Best known as being the alter ego of Spider-Man's nemesis, the Green Goblin, Norman Osborn has long been one of the biggest threats in the Marvel Universe, manipulating events from afar as the CEO of Oscorp. Following the invasion of Earth by the Skrull army, Norman found himself suddenly in the public eye and with goodwill after being the one to personally defeat the Skrull Queen. Norman would use this influence to lead the Dark Avengers as the Iron Patriot, a twisted version of Iron Man combined with Captain America's patriotism that tricked the public into trusting Norman, and showing that Tony Stark is definitely not the worst billionaire in the Marvel world.
Halfway through in at number 5, The Rival. Edward Claris is the rival, the archenemy of Golden Age Flash Jay Garrick. Claris was a chemistry professor at the university attended by Jay Garrick. He believed that he had recreated the formula that gave Garrick his speed. Bitter at the rejection of his research claims by the scientific community though, Claris became a criminal wearing a darker version of the Flash's outfit, the original Reverse Flash. The effects of this version of the formula however proved to be temporary and he was defeated when it expended. Decades later though, following the reformation of the Justice Society of America, Claris was retrieved from the Speed Force, because he had been put in there at some point, by the interdimensional supercriminal Johnny Sorrow, who invited him to join the new Injustice Society. Now composed of pure speed energy, Claris possessed Garrick's friend and fellow Golden Age speedster Max Mercury to get the Flash's attention. Rival committed a series of swift, gruesome murders at locations that, when mapped out, would spell out a message. We don't talk about the Arrowverse version, though. Like, I know his suit was meant to be similar to Daniel West's Reverse Flash, but come on. And for Johnny Quick. Johnny Allen, alias Johnny Quick, is a criminal speedster from Earth 3. Together with his girlfriend and partner in crime Atomica, he was a member of the crime syndicate. Johnny Allen was a high-profile criminal on the run with his equally criminal girlfriend, cornered on the roof of Central City's Star Labs. Allen was struck by a bolt of lightning which shattered the roof, and the duo fell into the lab space below, with Allen landing amid some chemicals. Obviously, this is the thing that ended up granting him his super speed, and he went on to become a super criminal alongside his girlfriend who had also been empowered. He took on the name of Johnny Quick, while his girlfriend took on the name of Atomica. The couple joined the crime syndicate at some point after this. Johnny Quick, as he now called himself, ran through Central City answering to no one, until the day the White House burned, around the time of Darkseid's incursion onto Earth Prime. The being that had destroyed Ultraman's Krypton came to Earth, and an alliance of super criminals formed to find a way to safety. Getting close to the end, and at number 3, Red Death. Red Death is a speedster that is an evil combination of Batman and the Flash, which already sounds terrifying, but wait till you hear his story. The Bruce Wayne of Earth 52 started off fighting crime with Robin, but Robins kept dying left, right, and center. So understandably, Batman got darker and darker, becoming more extreme with his, let's call them methods. Which honestly seems more realistic to me, aside from just quitting fighting crime. Which can't happen, otherwise we wouldn't have this story, right? And DC wouldn't make any money. This eventually leads him to Barry Allen, who refuses to give Bruce his Speed Force powers. So Batman, using the various rogues' weapons to fight off Barry, knocked him out. Once Barry was unconscious, Bruce tied him to the front of a cosmic treadmill-powered Batmobile and drove them both into the Speed Force. I don't even know how that happened or worked logically, but okay, you do you, Bat Marty. When entering the Speed Force though, Barry and Bruce ended up fusing together into an evil Batman with super speed and a lust for killing, while Barry's mind was trapped in Bruce's body. He then gets a visit from the Batman Who Laughs, who asks him to join the Dark Knights, whose goal is conquering the multiverse. Penultimately, in at number 2, Savitar. As a fan of the Arrowverse, I felt like I needed to include one of the most interesting speedsters in the show. Savitar, while sharing a name with another evil speedster from the comics, is actually revealed to be a time remnant of Barry Allen in the show, being more of a future Flash than a Savitar. Honestly, he's like a combination of both. His story, though, is pretty messed up. In essence, making himself and having a classic chicken and the egg scenario. In the post-Flashpoint Arrowverse timeline, Savitar comes back from the future to kill Iris West before her and Barry get married. This causes Barry to create as many time remnants as possible, which is basically a clone of himself, in order to stop him. But Savitar kills all of them except one. The one that he spares then gets shunned by the rest of Team Flash for not being the real Barry Allen, even though he is still the real Barry. It's weird. So in an act of fury, the Time Remnant runs back in time, creating a new identity for himself as the first speedster and the god of speed known as Savitar. But the suit he wears allows him to travel at basically instantaneous speeds, which the show Flash has not been able to do at this point, even in recent seasons. And finally, and at number 1, Reverse Flash. I know what you're thinking, okay? Isn't Eobard just the reverse Flash? Like, not actually a version of the Flash? In the main continuity, yes, but also thinking of the Flash Armageddon crossover, Barry Allen becomes the reverse Flash, so this could be another literal evil version of the Flash. But in the Dark Multiverse Flashpoint story, Eobard also becomes the Flash, and he kind of becomes his own form of hero in a way. A dark, twisted, messed up hero, hell-bent on eradicating competing heroes in the universe, but still a form of hero, right? Technically it counts. And I mean, like, he's still scary, alright? And a version of the Flash, so this counts for this list. In a universe where Barry Allen dies while trying to get his powers back with Flashpoint Batman, aka Thomas Wayne. But once Thawne tried to stop the war between Aquaman and Wonder Woman by threatening them and killing Arthur, you know there's gonna be some hell to pay. So he sets on shaping the world in his own image. This involves preventing Batman from ever becoming Batman and instead creating his own superhero team, full of versions of characters we know and love, but all with reverse Flash logos somewhere on their suits, usually. And I have to say, preventing Batman from being created is probably the smartest thing Eobard could have done, because either way, Batman is going to lead some form of resistance against you, so good on you. This is the smartest thing that any villain has ever done in the DC universe.
Coming in at number 10, we have the Wild West themed Xavier Gang. In an alternate Marvel universe that bears an incredible resemblance to America in the 1800s, a band of outlaws known as the Xavier Gang are plaguing a small town in Arizona, with every mutant member of the team being individually mind-controlled by a distant and diabolical version of Professor Charles Xavier. Using this team of the X-Men as puppets made up of both superheroes and supervillains, this Western crook version of Xavier was only defeated once a multiverse-spanning team of X-Men showed up to put an end to his mind-controlling ways. Coming in at number 9, we have the bloodthirsty Vampire Wolverine. In an alternate universe where vampires have launched an all-out assault on the United States, most of the X-Men are bitten and mind-controlled by the Lord of the Vampires, Dracula. Unfortunately for Dracula, however, Wolverine's healing ability allows him to regain his own mental control despite becoming a vampire, and thus is able to overthrow Dracula and become leader of the vampires. Consumed by a bloodlust that amplifies his already pretty frightening rage, Wolverine and his vampire army are able to wipe out most other superpowered life on the planet, only finally being defeated by the combined forces of Doctor Strange and the Punisher as a vampire hunting combination. Coming in at number 8, we have perhaps the most infamous X-Men palette swap with Dark Beast. Originally hailing from the alternate timeline known as the Age of Apocalypse, this version of Hank McCoy was a twisted mad scientist working under the tutelage of Mr. Sinister, striving to create the most powerful mutants possible, no matter the cost. Although this messed up future would be prevented by the X-Men, Dark Beast was wily enough to find a way into the main Marvel universe and avoid his existence being erased. Ever since, he's been a persistent thorn in the X-Men's side and a particular burden on Beast, who would much rather that someone didn't use his genius for evil. Coming in at number 7, we have the possessed Shadow Professor X from Earth 6141. Isn't that a mouthful? During the event known as M-Day, when Scarlet Witch wiped out most of mutant kind, the extremely powerful telepath known as the Shadow King was able to escape the loss of his powers by transferring his mind throughout the multiverse to the alternate world of Earth 6141, where he was able to successfully possess the mind of this world's Charles Xavier before the X-Men were even formed. Combining both of their telepathic might, this version of Xavier turned all of his students into perfect killing machines and placed them firmly under his psychic control, getting them to kill any superheroes who tried to interfere in the Shadow King's schemes. Coming in at number 6, we have the brainwashed Wolverine of Earth 14850. At one point in the regular Marvel universe, Wolverine was captured and brainwashed by Hydra in order to assassinate the Avengers, but luckily was able to be deprogrammed before he did any real lasting damage. On this alternate Earth, however, the deprogramming never took place, and Wolverine's killing spree of superpowered heroes was able to last for months. Armed with all of his incredible abilities, absolutely no remorse, and the addition of Hydra-developed teleporting technology that nullified even Wolverine's usual weaknesses, and this was a horrifying enemy that even the Avengers couldn't handle.
Number 5. Salim. Recently, Miles Morales got his own clone saga in his series Miles Morales Spider-Man. It turned out that the Assessor had made clones of Miles after capturing and studying him. This batch of clones was unstable, and after escaping were on the hunt to find a cure using any means necessary. Salim was sort of like the leader among them, and he ended up at odds with Spider-Man Miles and Spider-Man Peter. Due to being raised while rapidly aging by the Assessor, Salim and his brothers were kinda messed up and kinda misguided and kinda evil. They inherently struck out at Miles and Peter when the two groups of Spider-Men crossed one another's paths. After Miles mistook their found cure for a serum to make more clones and ended up destroying it, Salim decided to kidnap Miles' baby sister, Billy, in order to lure Miles to him. With only a few hours left to live, Salim wanted to face Miles, hoping to prove that he had successfully been created to be the superior version of him, despite being otherwise unstable and defective, as so many clones have been and often are. Number 4. Kraven the Hunter. It's not just Doc Ock who's taking a swing at web slinging when it comes to Spider-Man's rogues gallery. Kraven also once decided to step into Peter's shoes and become Spider-Man for a short time. This was during Kraven's last hunt, when Kraven seemingly had killed Peter and then took his place to prove that he was the better between the two. Kraven's approach to heroics was even more brutal in my opinion than Otto's, with many villains ending up fatally injured after Kraven attempted to get rid of them. In the end, it was revealed that Spider-Man wasn't actually dead, but had simply been given a drug to put him in a hibernation-like state after Kraven had disposed of him. Eventually, he was able to rise from the grave and return only to find out that Kraven had been making a mess of the Spider-Man mantle by adopting it in his absence. Kraven would end up basically surrendering, content with his last hunt, believing that he'd accomplished everything he had set out to do in his life. This story and Kraven's time as Spider-Man ends with him taking his own life. But don't worry, this is comics, so of course Kraven would be back. Number 3. Pestilence. Pestilence hails from an alternate AOA, Age of Apocalypse reality, the reality of Earth 5701. Here, Spider-Man ends up being chosen to become one of Apocalypse's 4 horsemen of death. He takes on the role of Pestilence, and this much more evil version of the character, allied with mutant supervillain Apocalypse, also really looks the part too. He has fangs which are poisonous and 6 arms, really looking more like a Spider-Man than most of his heroic counterparts typically do. Here, Peter was actually chosen to become one of Apocalypse's 4 horsemen because he was considered so inherently good at heroics and as a person, I imagine. Apocalypse chose heroes he identified as the best among them to become his horsemen in this reality. Number 2. Spider Doppelganger. The Doppelganger, or more specifically, the Spider Doppelganger, or the Spider-Man Doppelganger if you want, was originally an enemy created by the Magus during the Infinity War event. He was one of the many evil doppelgangers created to fight against the superhero community, which opposed Magus in the conflict. Although, like many of the other doppelgangers, the Spider-Man Doppelganger would die during Infinity War. He wouldn't stay dead though, as so many of the other doppels had. Instead, Spider Doppelganger ended up being resurrected by Demogoblin and would end up joining with him for a time, acting as his sidekick and being treated kinda like his pet. Spider Doppelganger would also go on to team up with such villainous spider enemies as Carnage and Shriek. In fact, he'd actually become for a time very close and loyal to Shriek, who treated him as though he were her own son. Number 1. Norman Osborn. On the reality of Earth 44145 lives a version of Norman Osborn who becomes imbued with spider-like powers and abilities. Of course, this being Norman, he decides to use said power in his pursuit of more power, not inherently being the hero type. Peter Parker, who used to work for Norman, reveals his plan to Norman's son and Peter's friend Harry in a letter. This leads to Peter's death, which in turn motivates Harry to fight his father. Norman Osborn as Spider-Man would go on to team up with Superior Spider-Man and Spiders-Man briefly during the Spider-Geddon event, but would end up partnered solely with Spiders-Man after suggesting that to defeat the Inheritors, they simply trap them on Earth 616. Obviously, as that was Superior Spider-Man's home world, he was not really down for this plan.